Y'all, I am so excited. I've been waiting for like 3 hours to get a cord to finish my podcast, one segment, and then to come over here and talk to you on YouTube with this equipment set up because I am starting to share about procrastination and laziness. I knew the pathway to that years ago when we first developed this. In 2019 or 20, I could have shown you how to go into that pattern in the body and unravel that. That's what I've done, with my chronic pain, the repression inquiry, in other words. I could have showed you how to do it back then, but I couldn't have told you. I couldn't have articulated why you should do it and how and what's the whole point of that. And I can now better than I could. And so when I have those insights, these later insights are mostly about how to articulate something that I've already seen. Because insight comes first, but that doesn't mean that you have the language to speak it, to put it into words. And it has to be integrated in your experience. And I wanted to wait to make sure, is this procrastination and laziness really gone for me? And before I talked about it and could articulate it and be sure about what I'm saying in my direct experience. So I know for a fact that this work is a pathway to end the procrastination and laziness because it's repression. And there's a reason for it, a really good reason that we are so-called lazy or we procrastinate. It's safety. And so it's fear held in the body. I've developed inquiry, as you know, many of you. I started in 2010, and because of my degree of embodiment had not reached the repression level, so to speak, the inquiry that I was developing was somatic self-inquiry, where you look at where is the self, but you include the body in that. But we never were able to get into the contractions deeply to dissolve or transmute those or see what was in there because that's the repression. So in the self-inquiry that we did back then, we would see thoughts, feelings, and sensations come and go in awareness, and you can verify for yourself that none of that is permanent and all of it is coming and going to awareness. And there's a certain level of freedom with that. Do I recommend that? No. Here's why. Because had I known how to get to the root of all that, first of all, I would have had to sit with all that stuff coming and going for so long. And that's the problem with that kind of path. It just points to awareness, but then you have this buried stuff that's still producing suffering, visible suffering and awareness, or in your life. And, we just rest and let it be. And it sounds good on the surface, especially for people who've been seeking for a long time, but it doesn't get to the root of suffering. So not only do you have to sit as awareness and watch a bunch of suffering come and go for years in different ways, but you recognize the space in which it's happened. You're the space, you're the light. But there's a lot of stuff that can still come and go. I had chronic pain, cancer, not a lot of stories or narratives or shadows, not a lot after the awakening, some, but mostly energetic stuckness, like body. And when I first started to do self-inquiry with people, it just didn't get to repression. So it was a lot of, let's look at things coming and going and seeing that none of those things are you, which is very common, non-dual kind of pointing or inquiry. And I have no answer to, well, how long does that last? Well, that could go on for a long time, actually. Because when you don't get to the root of suffering, stuff is going to keep coming and going. Because at the repression level, we're producing the suffering to stay safe from what's buried. So there's a reason for the suffering. And that is to stay safe. But that's not the topic here. I just wanted to point that out, that the same root is here with procrastination and laziness. It's somatic. At the repression or frozen fear level, just means there's fear and fear of anger or fear of hurt or sadness frozen in your body. In other words, it doesn't feel like those emotions anymore. It feels like your hardened body. The sense of separation. and the sense of lack or deficiency because you're deficient in those emotions that are buried. And that's the contraction. And that's what we couldn't reach, and what often isn't reached in first or second dimension, if you know our 3 dimensions. But that's where the laziness and procrastination is coming from. So when I was having people question identity as we do in non-duality, the mechanism that keeps people in patterns of laziness or procrastination never really arises. So what arises, though, is the safe stuff compared to what's buried, which means what could come up would be, I'm lazy. And although those words may point to a real pattern happening in your life, there's a tendency in consciousness, or more than a tendency, it's almost a demand to land on identity to stay safe from actually getting to or even seeing where the root of it all is there. I'll show you what I mean. For those of you who are skillful enough, or skillful with this work enough, you'll know what I'm about to do, and you can do it yourselves. But for those who haven't, just kind of listen, and you can imagine that this is the skill level you would have at some point with just a little bit of time here, or maybe even today if you can feel into this. But so if I were demonstrating this, I would say, I feel into my body fully. Just there's already awareness there, so just noticing. What we call body, which is actually just sensation. And let's say, well, as I feel into it, there's no stuck energy. But let's say for somebody who procrastinates, might have a tight stomach, where there's a lot of fear and shame held and buried anger or hurt, but doesn't feel like hurt or anger anymore because it's now this tension or contraction. That's why chronic pain happens. It's anger repression or hurt repression quite often, but it shows up as pain. See how the body hides it from us in different ways. But let's say this person has just the stomach contraction and feels into that and says, I can go do this thing that I want to do. And the stomach just tightens. So I can go plant the garden. The stomach tightens. I can get up and call my friend Joe, who I've been meaning to call. The stomach tightens. I could build that website that I've wanted to build. No. And so if you don't learn to hear what the body's saying, it's saying right there, and there's a technique that we have that brings this conditioning into awareness. It has to be prompted up in a certain way from that energy. But if I were to do that round again more skillfully, it would look like this. I can call my friend Joe. No. So the body is saying, no, you can't. It's not safe. Okay? So that's what the body's saying. But what does that mean? Does that mean Joe's going to hurt me? Maybe. Does that mean something bad might happen if I call Joe? Maybe. But what is it really safe from? It's safe from what you've always wanted to stay safe from, which is your primary repression, whatever you've already buried. That's the stomach. So if it's buried anger, the buried anger, which is fear, actually, the fear of that is saying no, that conditioning. Because if I call Joe, I might get angry. We're not conscious of that. It's buried. It's actually repression, so we're not conscious of it. All we know is, I'm not calling Joe. I've been procrastinating about that. And you might have some stories around it. So like, well, Joe's kind of an asshole. And when I talk to him, he kind of becomes that when he thinks I'm doing something that I shouldn't do or something. And I don't want to put up with that. He's a friend of mine. I love him. But how many times has an anger repressor described a friend something like that? Or anybody. But see, under that, so if I went with each one of those elements of that story, I say, what do I get out of, if I feel in my stomach, what do I get out of believing that he might judge me or whatever it is? And the stomach says get something out of it. Again, but it's unconscious, so you have to learn to prompt that up. But once you do this enough, you start to learn that the contraction is basically trying to keep you safe, and you know it every time, or get love, survive, basically. That's the conditioning. But again, safe from what? Because if I call Joe, I might have to get angry if he judges me. But I'm not aware of that as an anger repressor, of that part of it. I'm just aware that I don't want to call Joe, and I have my judgments, maybe some shadows. Those protect me from knowing that it's the buried anger that keeps me from doing that. But see, if you take it away from a person and say, plant the garden, like something, that I might want to do. This is how I lifted all the procrastination and laziness, is through sabotage inquiry, of like looking at things that I actually wanted to do, my body didn't agree, and discovering why, and becoming skillful to transmute the energy that says no, because that's the resistance to life. So if I were looking at that, I would say, okay, I want to plant the garden. Body says, no. What do I get out of believing that I can't plant the garden? Again, you're back to safety. And at some point, because you've already done the test here and you know what your primary repression is, you test into the anchor right there. Because, it's a really good reason why you have to do it yourself, because it's repression. And even though it's driving that, it doesn't want to arise, and it won't. So there's this unconscious sort of this line where we're aware that Joe is this or that, and we don't want to call him, but we're not aware perhaps that that's about safety. And even if we're aware of that, we're not aware that that's because of the anger that we buried, that we're afraid of. That's what's really unconscious. And if it's hurt or sadness, it's the same thing. It stops you too, because you're afraid to get hurt, afraid to express sadness or vulnerable emotions. But we have to trust ourselves and find out what our primary repression is, because we have to check into that. So because it won't arise on its own, that's why it's been bypassed, because it won't arise to awareness. And that's why awareness-based practices have a real limitation unless you include inquiry. Because you can sit there for years like I did, and then just like not do things that you kind of want to do, or you really want to do, but you can't. And I'll explain how the awakening enmeshes with that to sort of fool you into thinking that you're already embodied and free, when really it's that you can't move to some degree around certain things. And everybody's different. And some people don't even know that they can't, because they get on the spiritual path and they wake up to the presence, which is just be here and now, in a sense of, there's a sense of completeness with presence because it's now. And then the inertia or the repression hides in that. So the person still can't move though. The flow isn't there. There's the enthusiasm for life is drowned out, numbed down, or numbed out. It's different for everybody. It's a very common occurrence, though, even with people who do experience states or shifts, that the embodiment isn't there at first. And so you can accelerate that process, is what I'm saying, is get to the source from the beginning. Because if you sit and process identity for years like I did, or rest as awareness, the laziness and the procrastination and non-movement will stay there because it's not being touched. The repression isn't arising. So if that same person who can't plant the garden was a hurt repressor, they would find, what do I get out of believing I can't do that? I stay safe. From what? I'm hurt. That's buried. Can I express it? No, that's also buried. It's in the stomach. The conditioning that responds in that way, and you have to bring that into awareness in a particular way. It won't arise. This is why people stay with contractions, and they come to these Eastern practices and teachings, and something is missing. Their lives aren't, my life didn't flow, and I thought it would, just by the awareness aspect. there's a big caveat here. If you'll listen to it, I'm saying that if you care about really being yourself, like the realization is energetic. It's not just about presence or present moment awareness, because if there's inertia or repression or trauma here, there's still going to be suffering here in presence. Even though, and it's just awareness of that. And that's what I'm saying, because as you rest as that, and now you're just more aware of whatever is still here or is here, you're still blind to or unconscious to the repression that creates the things coming and going. It's just like with the procrastination. If this person were to do mindfulness or inquiry on their judgments of Joe, or feelings about themselves by not planting the garden, that stays at a level that's safe from the fact that the real reason I'm not going to call Joe or plant the garden is hurt. Who knows why the hurt is related to that? Maybe someone would see the garden or something. It's internal. You know, you have to trust yourself. There's an emotional reason for this stuff. And you have to be skillful too. And the emotions that you do feel are not repressed. So you have to be careful. The ones that arise in awareness, they're deceptive. As an anger repressor, through the years, I dealt with a lot of hurt and sadness that would come up because it was safer for me. And I would kind of fixate there because the anger wasn't arising. So there's nothing else to do other than see the stories and the feelings, but that never got to the root that created the inertia and created the stories to keep me safe from the repression. That was the root of the laziness and procrastination, you see? So we've put this work to you as soon as you come here to the awakening path to say, you know, what matters in your life? What's the point of recognizing presence if you're still suffering, you can't move, still procrastinating, lazy, and plus just sitting and resting as awareness? Be careful. What I say is do that all day long, but do this work with it. Because if you just rest as awareness, you're just sitting there and probably wondering why you can't really ask that person out on a date, or you don't even want a date, or you've given up on things in the world, or it's just better not to. You know what I mean? Look at that in your life. Because when we come to the awakening path, it can really enmesh with a kind of giving up on life or relationship for some of us, or just a procrastination and not doing what we want. I've discovered at age 50 that I know what I want and I've got the energy to do it. It's my own energy. It's the repression, the life force that I brought online, and it's all that I need to enjoy my life and not suffer and not procrastinate. The reason I procrastinated is these are things that I wanted to do. You know, there are sometimes things that we just need to do, like bill paying and stuff like that. That started to come in line for me. I always just sort of just kind of took care of it, but there would be issues with that, you know, when you don't really watch it. And just with the repression work, I just had this electronic budget that I use that helps me so much because I have an organization that's a business and personal stuff, and I wasn't watching that closely. That was something that I needed to do, though, for myself. Getting older and going to retire, of course. It was part of the procrastination for me, of not just a procrastination, but like a kind of checking out around certain things. And the spirituality kind of helped me justify it. I mean, cleaning, you know, is emotional for a lot of people, but they don't know it. I've shared that I didn't want to clean when I got older, but I didn't know why. I did clean, but I just hated it. And I made it much worse than it had to be, but I didn't know why. And that's a really good example of being blind for years to the root of that. So when I had inquiry back in 2012 that didn't get to repression, I was looking at identities and stories around that. And it just didn't get to it. You know, it gave a sense of peace around things, but the real transformation just wasn't there. So also, I didn't want to clean. So that's the whole thing. Like, if there's something that you don't want to do, but you just kind of need to do it, it's just something that we do in life. You don't need to. I've lived without, for not being a clean freak, and you can survive without being totally clean. But the thing is, if there's an emotional reason behind it, it's not, if there's a can't, is what I say you should trust. Because why is there a can't? Do something that you may need to do for your health or your house or your family. That's what I had to ask myself. I could never get to the root of it, though. And it was totally emotional. What it was is, as I've said before, my perception of my parents was that they didn't really like each other. And that's to say it nicely. And they weren't dealing with that, and they were disconnected from their bodies and each other, and that was my family. And everybody was cleaning, ferociously cleaning. And that represented disconnection, and you can't even see me. You can't even see yourself. So when I would get into relationships with people who would clean or clean a lot, that's what that represents, or used to represent to me. Totally emotional. And it became a source of contention with some partners because, that's a pain in the ass if you don't clean that. Right? It's awful to do to someone because then they have to clean it. I'm laughing because I don't have the weight of that, but that was actually really painful, where it caused relationship issues for me. And it wasn't I was a total slob. It's just that I was always less clean than my partners. Always. It was almost like an identity, but coming from like some sort of dark matter that I wasn't aware of, which was rage for mom and dad. I was angry at them. I buried anger as a child around everything and around this too. And so I stored that around cleaning, and then I couldn't do it. I literally couldn't. I mean, I could, but I had to force myself. Now it's just a loving thing to do. I'm in a relationship. I'm still not super clean, but I do it, and it's not a problem. I don't feel any energy on that. And I also want to be myself, and I don't want to clean for someone else. And so there's a balance there. But it's just no energy on it. There's no I can't. And I've checked it so many times because I'll sit there and go, okay, I should really do the dishes. I want to do the dishes. So right now there's no energy on it, but there used to be. And it's just a subtle contraction. Very subtle, really. I had to let my dogs out there. Very subtle contraction. I didn't know at first what it was saying. I'll just give you an example. I want to do the dishes. It would say no, but it wouldn't say it. I'd just feel it. And I saw myself not getting up, so I trusted that. So I knew it was saying no. And so what you get when you feel a no, when you do a reverse inquiry. So if I say, I want to do the dishes, and my body says, it says no, it's basically my body saying, I don't want to do the dishes. It's so simple. If we trust our body, because it's running everything, we may not know its operating system at first, but we come to know it much, much more here. If not completely, like making it all conscious, the programming of this. It's up to you. But at first you don't, and I didn't. It was just like, I knew that though. Just like I knew that when I said, I'm not angry, and my chronic pain flared up, that was saying, I'm angry. But the anger was repressed and buried and concretized into that pain. So it's hard to detect. And when I did this, I want to do the dishes, at first it was hard to detect, but it was obviously, I don't want to do the dishes, my body was saying. But that's deceptive right there. Because the mind bamboozles. It's part of its role is to keep us safe. So yeah, I don't want to do the dishes, but why? And if you ask the mind, it goes into analysis and stays away from the buried emotions, which is safe. So I learned to not answer a why question with the mind, but to trust and say it this way, because Dan created this inquiry, actually. And so this totally changed my seeing of what a why question is all about. Because a why question does get to the root if you ask it in the right way. And if you don't, it just takes you away from it. It's a really important question, is what's the source of something? So if I say, what do I get out of believing I don't want to do the dishes? What do I get out of not doing the dishes? And I would hear safe. And so at the mind bamboozles, my mind would come up and say, oh yeah, because it's just safer to sit here. Like something bad is going to happen if I go all the way into the kitchen, like 15 feet, and like put my hands in water and maybe some food. No, it wasn't the gross factor, because that's another bamboozle. Maybe I just don't like no. It's all a bamboozle because it goes back to the buried rage for mom and dad. That's why I didn't want to clean and do the dishes, period. And once I went to that, I didn't have a problem doing it then. And it was that easy. But when I was inquiring into the mind and the identities and the stories, it was a complete distraction. And it's also a distraction just to rest as awareness, because the repression is buried and you can't see the conditioning of that. So you have to have the awareness. That has to be there, just resting as the awareness and then feeling into that area and learning how to prompt up the right stuff. And then when you prompt it up, you learn how to rapid fire it, which is a new technique that we've created, which transmutes energy because it makes conscious very continuous trauma responses in the body, emotional trauma responses that are hidden. We've learned to make those conscious in a way that mimics or mirrors the body's response. And so that's why it transmutes energy. If you don't understand that, you shouldn't. You're working at the unconscious level. You have to do it. It's like all experiential work. But for me, it was the key, and it wasn't an overnight thing. And the mind that wanted it to be an overnight thing was also just keeping me safe. Because this is a lifetime of like training like an athlete not to do the dishes. So I'm not going to do that overnight because my entire system has been developed to not do it. So I have to have patience, and presence is perfect for that. Infinite patience to rest and be here. But if I'm not looking in the right place, I have to first get to the right place before the process even begins. And as I was in the identities and the stories, I wasn't in the right place. So the real process didn't begin to truly transform in these areas or heal the pain or anything. So once I started to find the buried anger connected to the cleaning and everything else, the process began. But repression makes the process go on for a while because that's the mechanism of no, I'm afraid. And so that's not going to be made conscious easily. But once you have skill and you know what you're doing, it's a consistent practice where the transmutation happens because you're actually getting to the core aspect of ego and you're just making it conscious, which is what awakening is. It's bringing things into awareness and seeing that those things are not you and recognizing that, no, the awareness is you. But how do you do that? With repression. You have to bring it up a certain way and see it in awareness in the form that it's in, which is what I'm calling here a continuous trauma response. The research calls it that, actually, but it's much more involved in that. I mean, not complicated. It's just you have to go into your body and really, really feel and see this stuff. Come here, Oliver. Oliver wants in. Hold on. Don't you love my talks? They're so full of Oliver interruptions. Okay. Are you following me here? Did I put you to sleep? Because if I did, that's another mechanism of the nervous system to keep us safe. We work with that too. But the whole point is your energy, the energy that you need to be yourself and to do what you want and to enjoy yourself and have enthusiasm about that and to have the relationships that you want is all within you. But you're not going to get to it unless you get to the repression level. That's my message to you. I thought that it was just awareness. It does have to be embodied. That doesn't have to be a long and really clunky and complicated process if you get to the root of suffering early. If you want to start this path and you haven't, there's a free repression test if you scroll down to the bottom of Killaby.com, and I usually put a link to that test here in the descriptions or the comments. Thank you.